Hi, and welcome to the Revenue Marketing Report. I'm your host today, Camela Thompson, and today I'm joined by Ruth Stevens. Ruth, I would love to hear an introduction and just let people know what you do.
Thanks, Camela. I am a sole practitioner consultant in B2b marketing. And over the years, I've developed specialties in sales lead generation programs and also about data. Mostly, when I say data, I mean mostly the customer and prospect database and the customer records involved there.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited to dive into this. I love a good data conversation. But
Yay.
before we go there, I would love to. I know this is kind of out of the blue. We did have an agenda. We're already diverging from the agenda, but I would
Go
love to
for it.
hear more about what you're seeing work in the market around sales lead generation. A lot of us are
Yeah,
struggling.
it's tough. I've been sad and chagrined to see year after year email being sometimes the sole media channel used for new lead generation and for cold prospecting. And it is, in my view, the least effective and increasingly a non-competitively high ROI media channel because people who don't know your company, don't know you, are just unwilling to respond, open the email, and that delete button is so nearby. And also, I blame, frankly, campaign automation, marketing automation tools for making it even easier, not only cheaper, but easier to conduct outbound campaigns using email. So we're in this kind of race to the bottom of prospecting effectiveness. There are other tools that are more expensive and less at your fingertips that can be, I think, delivering better quality leads.
And I would love to hear about some of those tools if we can just take a minute.
Sure. Well, the problem with my point of view is that I'm really a voice crying in the wilderness. I don't really expect B2B marketers to be able to break their email habit. It's like an addiction. Um, and one of the tools or the media channels that I recommend is dear old direct mail, believe it or not. I also recommend marketing events where now in a pandemic, we've seen that channel sorely limited, but when face-to-face events come back, I think those need to be an important part of the lead generation toolkit. Social media is really coming into its own, and not just LinkedIn, but even consumery social media channels like Instagram are being used effectively by businesses today. The
I,
telephone still works. I mean, there's a lot that can be done. So
I love that, especially the in-person events. I think as people are getting vaccinated, they're just so desperate to be around people after being isolated. So we're social animals. I think humans are just
indeed.
wired that way. Marketers, excluding let's ignore email for a second. I think
Okay.
a lot of marketers understand that we have to be in front of people in a lot of different places, different channels. And one thing that kind of furthers that even more is the B2b buying cycle or the customer journey and who all is involved in that. So let's talk about the B2b customer journey. So in demand generation waterfalls, we think of it as like this kind of plinko one to one. This person's falling down the track, and we're going to just focus on the one person. And that's just not how B2B always works. So I would love to hear your observations about the B2B buyer journey.
Indeed. For you to say that's not how the B2B buying process works always is an understatement. I've seen data suggesting that less than 10%, I think it was 7%, the number of B2B transactions involve a single buyer. And that would be things like buying copy paper and toner, placing an order for office supplies. But just about every business purchase involves more than one party. And there was some data from a few years ago that suggested that in large enterprises, the buying group or buying circle, buying center, there are a lot of different terms for it, comprises as many as 21 individuals on average. And in some categories, like technology, it's probably larger. And of course, we know the reason for that is that making a purchase decision for an important business process is a big deal. A lot is at risk. And it may be about how your business operates, or it may be about how your product gets produced and delivered to customers. So these are mission critical processes that you can't be playing around with. So the larger the company, the larger the order size, the larger the buying circle. So anyone who's thinking about a single contact or a single individual as a buyer is fooling himself or herself. That's really, frankly, ridiculous.
It's funny, people can't see my face, but when you said 21, I almost fell off my chair. But I shouldn't be that surprised because thinking as a technical buyer myself, who's been involved in those processes, you're involving the CFO, you've got the IT team involved, like just the list just keeps getting bigger
And
and
the
bigger.
end users, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then all of their managers, the stakeholders, it's just kind of, it's a messy ordeal.
So that means as marketers, we need to be in touch with all of these parties, the specifiers, the influencers, the end users, the decision makers, the purchasing officials. All of them have a role to play and their agendas are different. So we need to be speaking to them about different matters and different benefits and different features so that they come on board. One of the hardest things is inferring the buying role through strictly automated tools. Often you really need to get into the account in a personal one-to-one sales development rep or account rep or field salesperson level to really find out who are all the parties. Otherwise, as marketers, we just infer through title, but we have to have in our database an estimated or a confirmed buying role associated with each individual so that we can treat them properly and pull them in our direction by providing them with the information that they need.
So I love that you said each buyer has their own agenda because it really speaks to the psychology motivating them. Can we make a few generalizations? We can maybe give ideas of the kind of materials different roles are looking for.
Yeah, at a high level, it's pretty easy to guess. Decision makers are persuaded by ROI kinds of discussions, maybe about employee productivity or efficiency in a factory. But ROI is sort of the general umbrella term for those kinds of criteria. Then the end users are usually about, is this thing going to work? And is it going to be easy to use? So an end user would be around reliability, availability, ease of use. And then the specifiers would be about whatever specs they have. The engineers will say, these are the metrics that we need. So we have to deliver against that. And then there's the dear old purchasing agents who tend to be all about price, about other tactical criteria like shipping dates and reliability, reputation, and can we trust these guys to really deliver on time and on budget, those kinds of considerations.
I really like arming clients with kind of a multi approach, right? So I feel like every business should have a way to tell that ROI story. You're probably not interacting directly with the CFO. So how can you arm the primary point of contact with that information in a way that positions your product as favorably as possible? That's I think it's a fun exercise to think through. I think a lot of people don't really like that, but I think having sales armed with those takeaways is probably a pretty good idea. So how early in the buyer journey should marketing be communicating to different contacts in an account and altering their message? Like, how early should that personalization really start to take place?
Realistically, for cold prospect accounts, marketers are typically going to limit their differentiated messaging to 2, maybe 3 categories. Typically, a campaign would be divided into technical buyers versus business buyers, or line of business buyers, say. And so you would have a different message for the technical buyer that's all about availability and reliability and ease of use. And then when you're talking to the business buyer, the line of business buyer, it's going to be about productivity and ROI. So if you're breaking things down to a pretty broad category of 2 or 3 different types of buyers, then I would say start from the initial contact, meaning there's no time like the initial contact to be speaking in a relevant manner. But realistically, as I said, when it comes to making a business case to all 21 of those members of the buying circle, that's more likely to be in a face-to-face or a personal selling kind of environment, and less likely is it that the marketers will be asked to develop 21 different types of communications.
I love that. That's so practical and enabling sales with the different materials to use once they understand who plays which role. I think that's just efficient and smart. So I love that advice. So let's talk about business metrics. So there's a really big difference. And I think as somebody who has been an analyst and in the weeds, it's really easy to get stuck in the very tiny details when the executive leadership team only needs a smaller set of information. So it's fine to get into the weeds and help individual business stakeholders run their business with more information. But what are the things that the executive team really cares about that I should be focused on as a marketing analyst?
So a marketing analyst in your terms is someone who's determining the results, the effectiveness of very likely digital, but any kind of marketing investment, right? So
Right.
this would be like campaign analysis. And you're right, a senior executive is not going to care about open rates and click-through rates. But before I talk more about the marketing metrics that a senior executive is likely to want to be informed about, the first thing I would do is ask them. I think your very colorful description of the marketing analyst in the weeds is probably looking at metrics that keep him or her from thinking the kinds of thoughts that a CFO or CMO or CEO is looking for. So asking the CMO what should be in your dashboard, what are the metrics that will convince you that we're optimizing our marketing investments. Typically, when it comes to lead generation, I often see the most effective number as being cost per lead, usually by media channel, because you're going to see completely different costs per lead when exhibiting at a trade show versus conducting a digital display campaign. But then the quality of that lead would then be another metric that would make the quality of that lead apparent, would be lead to sales conversion rates. And this is where life gets really difficult for the marketing analyst and everybody else in the company because the sales conversion is almost never attributable to a single marketing investment, not to mention a single sales call. As we know, it takes scads of touches from both sales and marketing into all those 21 people we were talking about. So it's a good idea at that point to get to the account level where you're looking at how much have we invested in trying to persuade this account. And sometimes that's pretty easy to do if you have account level data like IP address or other identifiable account level identifiable digital tools to make those connections. But the other thing that happens, or the other challenge is going to be the pressure from sales that's built on that. We know that endless disconnect between sales and marketing. I've never heard a salesperson credit marketing with anything that he or she converted. And marketers, of course, are always complaining that sales doesn't follow up properly on the leads they have so assiduously and creatively and carefully developed. So there's that Mars versus Venus problem that will come in. But in my experience, if the chief salesperson and the chief marketing person in the firm respect and like each other, then those kinds of issues tend to go away.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Because when they don't respect each other, everyone beneath them sees it.
It's so hard.
If they think they're being sneaky, they're not. Like everybody knows. And I think without alignment there, you're in trouble. And I really like how you said it was so affirming to hear that I've never heard a salesperson credit marketing for anybody for anything as a marketer. I've been on both
Except
sides.
sometimes to be polite.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
but they don't
no,
really believe it.
Yeah, no, anytime I got a compliment, I was riding high for 3 months on that one compliment. Let's just put it that way. But how do you think, other than aligning the executives, do you think there are other tactics or things we could be doing to help that alignment along?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, marketing needs to step up and acknowledge internally that we marketers are in service to sales and that the P&L in a B2B company is owned by the chief revenue officer, not the CMO. And our job is sales enablement, sales productivity improvements. And this can be difficult for a marketer to swallow if he or she comes from consumer marketing where the P&L is owned by the product manager who's a marketing person. Being in a service role can be a tough pill to swallow if you're used to being responsible for the P&L. Other than that, though, there are tactical things that we can be doing. We can make damn sure that our customer and prospect data is clean and complete. And I see too many times where the data, I'm not talking about campaign data except insofar as it lives within our CRM or our marketing database. I'm talking about that corporate asset, which is customer data or customer and prospect data. And there's a record. There's a record about each account, and there's a record about each contact. And if the phone number is wrong, if the title is what the guy did last year and he's changed jobs, if the postal address is non-deliverable, if the email bounces, then no wonder the sales teams think that we're incompetent and irresponsible. So, we have a job to do to serve them properly. And I see it too often that data, the customer record at both the account level and the contact level are handed over to a data administrator who is usually a very sharp dedicated, smart, and a respectable person, but has a terrible time keeping the data fresh and complete. And the marketers who are trying to use the data, not to mention the salespeople, are saying, oh, well, the data's not my job. It's Mary over here. She's the administrator. She's in charge of the marketing database. And I say, that is wrong.
Amen. So one of the reasons I came over to marketing ops from sales ops was I felt like marketing ops didn't always appreciate how much anything they did impacted everything downstream.
Hear, hear.
And not understanding how, let's say, for example, Eloqua or Marketo and Salesforce interact, how those rules, which record takes priority, all of those really mundane, detailed things are so critical to the rest of the business. Because if you have salespeople who are on the phone updating records real time, I'm going to trust that data over something coming from Zoom Info that might be 6 months old.
Hear, hear.
So marketing operations, what you do is so important. And it's really critical to understand how your systems are talking to each other and how everything you do impacts downline. So this applies to data enrichment, lead scoring, MQL thresholds. Anything you change is going to drastically impact the people downstream.
Right.
And I think one of the things from my perspective that we could do better as marketers is work with the salespeople closer on defining what a qualified prospect is. Because
Indeed.
I've always wondered why marketers don't talk to sales more, because these people are on the phone talking to people all the time and getting live feedback. That's such a wonderful resource. Let's use it.
Hear, hear.
Oh,
boy, are you and I on the same page or what?
Yeah, let's get back to the data a little bit. I'll get off my soapbox. You hit a nerve. So getting back to the data a bit, I think I also want to acknowledge that what marketing operations is tasked to do is extremely difficult when it comes to analytics. Because we use so many different systems to interact with people, and those systems speak different languages, it's really hard to combine them all back together. I feel like arming analysts and operation with a strong argument to invest in analytics and free up their time to make those more strategic insights instead of spending that time just trying to connect things together is something that would really benefit the business and the analysts. Like everybody wins. How can we best convince marketing leadership that data is something we need to run our business well?
To me, that answer is so obvious that if we have to make the case that data aids and in some cases runs decision making to people who don't believe it, then we have to change companies, because every business person today understands the value of good quality data, not just customer and prospect data, but also data about the operations of the entire company. If you have to persuade them about the value of data, I really recommend an article by Thomas Davenport called Competing on Analytics that first appeared in the Harvard Business Review. And I would expect by now that every senior executive, at least in this country, is aware of the concepts that have been advanced there. And if they haven't, then all is lost.
I love the Harvard Business Review. If you don't have a subscription, listeners, get it.
Hear, hear. I would say that we're way beyond the question of the value of data as a whole. However, there are environments where the senior management may not understand in their firm how this interoperability problem that you described is wasting the analyst's time and and causing demoralization and getting in the way of business optimization. And frankly, what I would do is if you have a vendor who you think can solve some of these problems, then I would go to that vendor and ask for case studies, research reports, and other persuasive points that can be assembled to show how that solution can be a productivity and ROI producer. And then maybe internally capture some data in two areas. One would maybe be to do a small time and motion study about the number of minutes that it takes to do some ridiculous, unnecessary task that could be automated, and show the actual the cost of that inefficiency to that firm in that office in that situation, and that can be pretty persuasive. And then the second piece would be the kind of qualitative impact. Like, get some quotes from these poor beleaguered analysts who are wasting their time and feeling frustrated, and just weave in a couple of sob stories that show, here's one: employee retention rate. If analysts are quitting because you don't have the tools in place to help them do their real job, then they're going to quit and go elsewhere, and that has an enormous expense and impact on productivity.
A big gap I've seen is that a lot of executives, well, first, they place too much faith in Excel. Excel can't do everything. And second, they view the data crunching as part of the analyst's job, as an acceptable expense, as something that they should be doing. And they're missing the big picture that the analyst's real value is translating those insights into actions, and actually looking at root causes and unearthing why things aren't as efficient as they could be and how to improve that. And it can also be tough to convince a CMO to allocate budget to an analytics tool when there's this new lead gen tactic tool that looks interesting.
How frustrating. Yeah.
Well, and I think
this shiny object problem, isn't there?
Yeah. So I really like your suggestion of actually quantifying the amount of time that's spent and pointing out retention rates in marketing operations. The turnover is extremely high. There's a lot of data out there people can get. And the cost of replacing someone is so steep that those two combined with your time study, that's a really good business case. I think it's compelling. And if they don't get it then you have some deep thinking to do. Let's talk a little bit more about the difference between data and insights. So I know we talked a bit about that when we were saying trying to get the data cleaned and connected and then spitting out metrics. To me, that's data. Then insights are more high-level trends and actually some kind of narrative and story around that. Do you agree with that, or do you feel that there's set metrics that we should also be looking at and not just focusing on the story piece?
Usually it's a combination of the two. And in large organizations, you are likely to need two different job roles. People who are wrangling and analyzing, crunching on the one hand, and then there's another role, sometimes it's called business analyst, whose job it is to take those numbers and convert them into business speak so that they're accessible to a non-technical audience. And if we're in a small company where a single individual or a small group is doing both need to be done.
It took me a long time, unfortunately, to realize that when I threw a chart up on the wall, other people weren't necessarily seeing the same things I was. And it's really important to take a moment and outline the trends you're seeing so that executive leadership can apply the context they have that we maybe don't to that scenario. And it's just an extra step, but I think it's a really important one that can be career changing, really.
Yeah, the single most important business tool for an individual is the ability to communicate. And an analyst who can add 3 bullet points of what does all this data mean is the one who will get the respect and the notice and the promotions and the kudos and the slaps on the back that are deserved.
I mean, you move from somebody who's tactical and in the weeds to strategic. That's huge. That's
Here,
huge.
here.
Where can people find you online?
I have a website called ruthstevens.com where I've posted many of the hundreds of articles I've written on the subject of B2B marketing. I also teach part-time at NYU Stern, the business school here in New York. I also didn't mention, your listeners might be interested to know that I've also used business school teaching as a way to spend time in interesting foreign countries. I've picked a city that I love or would like to learn to love and find out what's the top business school there and network my way into a job opportunity there and go and spend a semester teaching in
I have a new life goal.
interesting. Oh, it is so much fun. Compared to tourism, it's just so much more satisfying because I get to put down roots and have something to do other than just go to museums and temples and get to really know people and have something to do all day or part of the day. And so I've spent 2 different semesters at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology and 2 different semesters at the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore, which is a very interesting city. And I've also taught in Greece and in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and Sydney, Australia. So that's a little sort of fun fact about my background.
Oh, I love that so much. I would just the food alone. That's a big motivator for me.
Indeed.
Especially in Hong Kong. My goodness. I've
Mm.
heard stories about the street vendors. Well, thank you so much, Ruth.
I really enjoyed chatting with you, and thanks for your focus on these important points. I hope the B2B marketing world is listening.
Thank you so much.